Hey, I'm Stephanie, and it's time to talk about the new YSL Couture Mini Clutch Quads that YSL just added to their line. You might have seen reviews of these already. In fact, you might have even seen my reviews, but today's video is going to be a little bit different because it is an upside down, inside out review where we try to take a look at makeup from a different perspective and perhaps discuss some things that people might not necessarily talk about in a normal review. If you want to see swatches and comparisons and talk details about all four of YSL's new palettes and their context within the new line, I will make sure to link those videos below. But today, we're going to try to answer the question, did YSL change the formula of their new quads? They recently reformulated their very popular lipstick, so did they do the same thing to their eyeshadows? I did some research and the answer might surprise you. In my opinion, what makes these quads very special is their floofy, delectable mattes. But if you saw my initial review of the 700 Over Noir and 800 Over Doré palettes, you might recall that I mentioned that the mattes in those palettes, particularly the darkest shade in each palette, those shadows just weren't quite as magically easily blendable as the mattes in the original 6 palettes. It's not like those darker matte shadows were a patchy mess. I just had to work a little bit to blend them out, whereas the mattes in the original 6 palettes just kind of blended themselves. But those mattes in the new palettes also feel more like typical powders, so maybe a little bit more tightly packed and a little bit less floofy and special. So the idea that YSL might have tinkered with that formula kind of shocked me because I feel like YSL did something really special with those original 6 quads. It is exceptionally rare for any brand nowadays to come up with a formula that feels truly innovative. And YSL managed to do it with their floofy, fluffy, creamy, powdery, cloud-like mattes. And I felt like the formula was pretty popular, at least among those of us who enjoy luxury eyeshadows. So I was a little bit skeptical that YSL would change such a winning formula, and I began to doubt my own experience. After all, the differences were subtle and the new quads are still really good. But several of you responded to that video by saying that you had also noticed the same thing. So that was my first inkling that the formulation change wasn't just in my head. So once all the newest quads had finally arrived, I was done testing them and taking all my notes, I decided to risk watching some other people's reviews. Some people that I really trust and I think know makeup because they use a lot of makeup. They buy a lot more makeup than I do. They get more in PR than I do. And so they really have kind of like an encyclopedic knowledge of the makeup world. And so I went to these people to see what their thoughts were. And they didn't notice a difference. 2 that I could think of off the top of my head right now who make excellent content are Heba S, who not only reviews and demonstrates a ton of new makeup, but also has a lovely calming presence, and Sophia Sees Beauty, who is a luxury makeup reviewing machine. Both of them will be linked below because they're both worth watching, but neither of them noticed a difference. And these women try a lot of makeup. They have a much broader basis for comparison than I do. So that kind of made me doubt myself. Did they not notice simply because we each have different approaches to makeup and we notice different things? Or did they not notice because there was nothing to notice? So I figured it was time to do a deeper dive into these ingredients to see what's really going on. Especially because another commenter on my channel mentioned the fact that they like to wait for reviews to come in whenever they're considering buying something from a line when a luxury brand is expanding an existing line of cosmetics. Because apparently they noticed that brands will kind of take out some of the more expensive ingredients that made a formulation feel so special when they expand the line, meaning that the quality of subsequent palettes then kind of goes downhill. So I thought that was worth investigating. Luckily, I still have all the boxes, so I have all the ingredients at my fingertips for the new palettes as well as all the old palettes, because if you're trying to find this information on the website, good luck. Before we start diving a little deeper, I just need to mention I am not a cosmetic chemist. I'm a musician. So although I do my best to investigate what's going on in this ingredients deck, I am not an expert. So I consider this discussion very slightly informed speculation and definitely not immutable fact. The main purpose of this exercise is to give us a bit of an anchor, to keep us grounded and a little bit more down to earth in our shopping behaviors. Because I don't know about you, but when I see most makeup releases, I'm just like, ooh, it's so pretty, I want to try it. But when I spend a little bit of time reading all these nearly unpronounceable ingredients on the back of the box, it makes me remember what's in this packaging. Chemistry class. Makes it a little easier to say no when I put things in that light. So I went through and read the backs of all of these boxes, and let me tell you, it was not fun. The box is shiny, the writing's tiny, and most of these words look like complete gobbledygook to me. I mean, words like talc and mica, I can handle. By the way, every single one of these palettes has talc in them, so if you're talc-free, you can skip these. But then there are words like octadodecyl stearoyl stearate? You know what that sounds like to me? Like somebody was really bored and they decided they wanted to come up with a tongue twister. You know what? They did a good job. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. All that to say, after reading all of this gobbledygook, I think I finally found the answer. And it's not that they changed the ingredients. It's that they changed the ratios. I was chatting with Beauty in the Beaker, also here on YouTube, also linked in the show notes, and unlike me, she has a background in science. And she was explaining to me that an ingredient can potentially have multiple functions. For example, it can act as an emollient, but it can also act as a preservative. However, we don't know what function an ingredient will have in the ultimate end result of the formulation without more information. For example, what other ingredients is it interacting with? What are the ratios of said ingredients? How was it all processed? Hot, cold, under pressure, and so on. So a basic ingredients list won't tell us much. However, the order of the ingredients in the list might give us some more insight, since the higher the ingredient is on the list, the higher the ratio of that ingredient in the formulation. So after spending far too much time squinting at these far too difficult to read boxes, I think I finally found the answer. It looks like all 10 of the current quads in YSL's permanent line have very similar ingredients across the board. Every once in a while, you'll find a freak ingredient in one palette that's not in another, for example, carmine, but I have a feeling that has to do more with the colorways than the actual formulation and feel and functionality of the shadow itself. Because every single time I looked up those freak ingredients, turns out they were pigments. Now, although all 10 palettes have very similar ingredients lists and they all include things like the sweet almond oil, coffee seed oil, and ficus indica flower extract, which were all ingredients that people were pretty excited about, those ingredients aren't always in the same order. But when I compare the ingredients list of my favorite fluffy mattes with the ingredients list of the mattes that I feel are a little bit more humdrum and a tiny bit patchy, there was a pattern. And for this, I'm going to reference my notes, which are here. But my favorite mattes all had the same ingredient in the magical third position on the ingredient deck. And that ingredient was aluminum starch octanyl succinate. So I checked the ingredients decks on the slightly inferior mattes, and although they all contained that ingredient, it was usually in the 6th or 7th position, so lower down on the list, meaning that the ratio was lower within the formulation itself. So I thought I would look up this mysterious aluminum starch octanyl succinate. And do you know what it does? It reduces the greasiness and tackiness of cosmetic formulations. Now, if a powder, for example, an eyeshadow, is tacky, then it's going to stick to itself. And if it's sticking to itself, then it's not going to stick as evenly to my eye, making the application patchy. And since the eyeshadows that I wasn't quite as fond of have less of this ingredient because it's lower on the deck, then I'm assuming maybe that's why I think they look a little bit patchier on the eye. And you know what else this ingredient does? It allows a cream to powder type of texture, which is exactly what I loved so much about those original mattes. And these patchier mattes aren't quite as floofy feeling. So I suspect it's the amount of aluminum starch octanyl succinate that feels off to me. So do I think this means that YSL reformulated their eyeshadow quads? No. I think that would be taking it too far considering how similar the ingredient decks are across all of the palettes, old and new. And as I mentioned in that review of 700 Over Noir and 800 Over Doré, the reality is that the difference is very subtle. I am a very detailed makeup user. I like to get my phalanges in there and really feel what I'm working with. And not everybody's like that. The everyday makeup user isn't like that. And even in that review, I said I didn't think that an everyday makeup user would necessarily notice that difference. What kind of makeup user are you? Are you really easygoing? You just like what you like? Or do you really like to get your fingers in there and discover every little detail about your cosmetics? As a member of that latter category myself, did this little detective adventure make me feel validated? Yes. Yes, it did. You can call me a beauty guru because that's what I am now. Reading this horrible packaging was my trial by fire, and I have now earned the title. So my official take on those minor changes in some of the shadows in the new quads is that a couple of those mattes are minimally inferior to the mattes in the original palettes. Specifically, the darkest black shade in the Over Noir palette and the darkest brown shade in the Over Doré palette. But I also think that you are only going to notice those minuscule differences if you're a detailed makeup user, because the quality of these new quads is still quite beautiful, and I do think they can keep their title of luxury eyeshadows. If you'd like to see if any of the color stories appeals to you, I will link my comparison videos in the show notes along with my affiliate links in case you'd like to take a closer look. But if you really want to thank me for this upside down, inside out review, then please like, comment, subscribe, watch another video, all that jazz. But even if you don't, I hope you have a great week, and we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.